So this is the third webinar we're having in Collab Decisions. So welcome to all of you. And we have Chris as a guest speaker today. So we'll hear you later discuss or present a CBA decision from Tideway. Look forward to that. Before we start, like I said in the beginning, it will be good if people joining, if they present themselves with names and where they're from in the commentary. So you can add that in so we know who's actually joining. That will be great. We are recording this session as well, so just be aware of that. And we'll be sharing the recordings later on our webpage as well, so you can see it there if you want to rehear it or share it with some of your colleagues who could actually benefit from hearing this brilliant presentation today. Also, if you have questions while we are having the webinar, feel free to write them as well. If more people are joining, it could be difficult perhaps to have an open discussion. If we are a smaller group, we will open up the discussion to be free, but otherwise put it up again as a commentary, and Annette will have a look at that from time to time and ask the questions to Chris if they're relevant. Otherwise, we'll have a discussions at the end of the presentation. I think that's where my introductions end, and perhaps this is the normal how we have as an agenda. So we'll just use a few words to explain what Collab Decisions is, and then we'll have the presentation from Chris, questions, and we will at the end then explain a bit of what we will see coming up next in Collab Decisions and how you can get in touch with us. And over to you, Paz, to present a bit of us.
Thanks, Randy. So this is
sorry.
This is a group, Collab Decisions, where we, we all three have been working in how to make decisions more fair, more transparent, and Randy, you already, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself. Myself, I'm a researcher, a consultant, and also work for, now I work for DPR Construction on the quality group. And I have implemented these practices in both design and construction. And we want to use this platform to share the knowledge we have gathered through our experience. We do these webinars regularly. We share research as much as we can. All public access research is available in our webpage. We have videos and available for all of you, and we want to just create a better understanding of how these things work and why this is important. So, Annette, are you still there? Well, I'll introduce Annette if she's not at the moment here, but she's also a researcher. She's in Germany. She's finishing her PhD at KIT in Karlsruhe. I can't pronounce that right. Sorry about that. And she's a consultant. She's working in consulting at Refine Projects. And Randy, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Well, yeah, my name is Randy. I'm originally from Denmark and now working full-time at Lower Thames Crossing as a lean manager. I love to do a bit of research on the side, but primarily I'm a practitioner trying to implement lean as best as I can on one of these major infrastructure projects. And for me, lean and Collab Decisions and choosing by advantage is all about inclusiveness and get the right knowledge together when we make these decisions. I think that's quite important. So that was a short introduction to me.
Thank you. And then, our mission is to inspire and support the construction industry to make better and collaborative decisions. And our vision is that a diverse and inclusive construction industry that embraces collaboration in the decision-making process to innovate and improve the industry will impact society for now and future generations. So we really think this is a change, an opportunity for deep change in long term for the industry. Do you want to add something else, Randy? Or you're in mute.
No, I think we should let the case speak now and get some
Let's go.
practitioners' input to this. I like that. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, thank you. And I'll move on. That's what I'm going to cover. Do you want to carry on the next one? The next one is just an introduction to myself.
Chris, oh yeah, you're going to introduce yourself. Go ahead. I
think the thing that is probably unusual most about my experience is I've been on design, construction and client side. I was fortunate to train with the Highways Agency Lean team, developed various techniques with Lean and adapted them to construction's challenges, which is actually the most interesting part of it. Lean improvement, communication, sales, collaborative planning. And what I'm talking about today is choosing by advantages. Carry on, Randy. Brief introduction to Thames Tideway. I'll let you read the stuff for yourselves. Basically, it's a £4 billion pipe running parallel to the Thames. It's massive, it's deep, and it's a sort of job you do once every 100 years to keep a city clean. So it's a fairly epic project. Next one, Randy. And there's a little graphic of it. And the big problem is that when it rains a lot on the banks, there is a thing called a combined sewer. So the stormwater plus all the foul water goes into the same system. It used to be something that happened in emergencies. With twice as many people as it was designed for, it was happening every other week. And all that grot goes into that river and slops up and down with the tide. So it's a fairly immediate and horrible problem that they're dealing with. You will notice that the sun shines on the river and the rain shines on the bank. It's not always as simple as that. Next one. And the job is divided into 3 sectors. This particular choice that we're talking about today is in the central section. The thing to notice there, at the bottom of the pipe, before the pumping station, we are 66 meters underground. That's how big a piece of work this is. And the next one. That's just a sample picture of a particularly large hole in the ground, which is what we're up against, really. And moving on. Here's the problem statement. The conforming design, the initial design, was based on an in-situ concrete lining of the tunnel. The management, as the construction developed, thought there might be worth looking at the option of using precast. Various arguments: time, safety, space, new technology, etc. The group that was dealing with that were unsure as to how to proceed in terms of demonstrating a safety case. And I picked up that conversation, had a discussion with the lead, and I thought there was a way I could adapt choosing by advantages to help them carry out an objective comparison of the safety cases between in situ and precast. On the bottom wording there is verbatim how I sold CBA to that project lead. I hope for Paz's sake that is reasonably precise. It may not be, but that's what I used. Move on. The workshop, we actually, believe it or not, knocked it over in 3 hours, which I thought was ambitious myself. 16 attendees, you can see them listed out there. And I went round and asked them at the start how many years experience they had. 303 years. So you'd hope there isn't a lot that that group hasn't seen between them. That's a lot of wisdom. Move on. And I aimed to give them a mission statement. What did success criteria, what did good look like? And I warned them on this piece of paper that we were looking for a consensus and looking to make a decision, or recommendation, sorry. I also warned them that we were not going to look at cost until we'd got right through the rest of the discussion. I also included time in that, which is going beyond cost, but in construction it is so nearly always the same as cost. A little tweak there to cover that. Move on. This is a list of the various bits of preparation that I put in place. And this took probably a total of several days, over a month, just to get this 3 hours absolutely as right as I possibly could. One little bit of prep I asked the group to do was a pre-mortem. Yes, imagine from your experience the most likely thing that's going to lead to a major safety problem, or an environmental disaster zone, or someone who has a life-changing injury. Sort of things that are held against a project for the whole of their duration. And you can see the basic stuff at the bottom there of any facilitated meeting. Move on again. Quite a big agenda to fit in 3 hours. So we did an update at the beginning to confirm that we had 2 options that met the minimum criteria. So we were prepared to go with either. I explained what we were going to try and do. I asked them to write down their pre-mortem, the most likely scenario leading to a major problem. We then went round, and I've just seen a question, HSWE, health, safety, health, safety, welfare and environment. Good question. And then we'd got all these subject matter experts in the room. We asked them each to do 2 to 5 minute presentation on how their subject area would play out in a precast option and an in situ option, and try to sift out the things that differentiated one from the other. So that was about 20 odd areas. And you can see from there, I'll talk through the rest of the agenda now as we go to the next slide. So that was a list, a prepared list that I set up before we started of the 20 odd areas where we wanted to make a comparison between the 2 options. And we went 2 to 5 minutes each round that entire set of subject areas. And what I wrote down outside of the circle is where there was comment that made that differentiated one option from the other. And moving on. And for those of you not familiar with the wheel, we've done that at Lower Thames and may well be elsewhere. For my mind, it ensures that all the points on that wheel start as equal. So we got those 20 odd subject headings. Can I read if you go back a slide, Randy, those titles on the left-hand side, those was the subject areas that we covered on the wheel. And there were a couple that emerged. So what's written on that slide is the same that's on the blue post-its on the wheel. Everybody happy to move on? So we had 20 plus subject headings, but actually, in a relatively brief discussion, we concluded that more than 10 of them didn't have any significant differentiation between the two options. So, for example, there was a hand-arm vibration syndrome, HAVS, a well-done occupational risk, but actually it was concluded to be more or less the same for either option. So we started with 20 odd things that might have made a difference. We'd got to 10 or so left that might make a difference. And then we concentrated on, well, come on, what's the big 5 or 6? And we isolated 6 that we thought were the most likely, the most significant differentiators that we would want to have taken account in any final analysis. And then having done the 20 odd, we had to just mess around with the wording a bit just to make them clear so that we were choosing objectively as we could. And move on. And those 6, we then put down the left-hand side of that table. You can see it. So those are the factors. And we then, against those factors, tried to define criteria, such as more people underground or lower pressure pumping operations, fewer lifts. And then we tried to, where we could, which wasn't very easy actually, try to quantify that. So I seem to remember that we had about, under the precast option, about half the number of people underground. And actually for the safety guys, that is a massive issue, because having people underground in tunnelling operations is a risk in itself. So we're trying to be as objective and define in an engineering sense as closely as we could what the attributes were of each, and possibly, and from there, the advantage. So the precast option, the advantage was half the number of people underground, etc. And then when we got those far as we could with that, we then looked at what was the biggest differentiator, the paramount advantage of one proposal over the other. And that was the fewer number of people underground. And you can see the way I set out the table to capture those numbers, or those weightings that we attached to those various criteria, or those various factors, sorry. So if you move down to the next slide, the paramount advantage was under precast, 50% less people underground. And then the second most important thing that the group could see was a weighting of 9 was less pumping operations and lower pressure pumping operations. The third one was 8, a more controlled environment, and you can see the rest. And the point was, in the end, that of the 6 big differentiators we had, 5 of them, shown blue, favoured the precast option. 1, the fewer lifts, in the green, that was an advantage of using the in situ, cast in situ option. So we had 5 out of 6 priorities favouring one proposal, and weightings of 36 against 7 favouring one proposal. And the point was that that group of 15 or 16 achieved a consensus on those numbers in about 20 minutes. I was pretty well surprised that it took us as little time as it did, but it did. We then went back to that pre-mortem I'd said, what do you think, from your experience, is the most likely thing that could go wrong here? And made sure that we had covered those off successfully in our comparison, which we had. But it was a good check back on process. Move on. In passing, we had made various notes of risks, assumptions, and opportunities. So, like a conscientious facilitator, we scribbled them down, and they had to go into the report, so someone took them away to make sure they were bottomed out in the usual way. Move on. And we then compiled a report that went to the Tideway project board with a clear recommendation. Actually, I've missed out something, which was that at the end of that previous discussion, we then went back to, is there a cost that we can't meet? And that was not concluded to be a problem. So we did consider cost, but we considered it for probably about 2 minutes. Everybody was convinced that there wasn't a problem. So going back to the recommendation on this page, clear recommendation. We reproduced in the report the wheel and the fact sheets so that people could see the process we'd used and the prioritization exercise, reproduced the tabular method output, and showed the list of attendees so that anybody looking back at it could say, well, all these people were here. They used an auditable, organized, managed system, and this was the output, hence the recommendation. And I think the next one's probably the last slide of any detail of mine. The evaluation. That first extract is from the report to the Tideway project board. That was my prize, to have all attendees were in agreement. Everybody was happy with that. And actually, as I packed up, there were 7 or 8 people said, that was really useful, thank you very much, blah, blah, blah. But the 2 I could actually get note of who they were the guy who set it up in the first place and the Tideway Central project manager for Ferrovial Lang O'Rourke. And I might just tell you that I don't think there's anyone from them in looking in today. Ferrovial Lang O'Rourke Flow have been pretty well opposed to collaborative planning on Tideway. But they went along with this very nicely indeed. It's quite interesting. The only worry I have, having gone through all of this, the people I really want to speak to are the skeptics. I'm presuming that most of the people who are listening in today are converts. And I think the next slide is asking people if they've got questions. Well, I've been rude. Thank you for listening in the first place. See what questions and comments there are.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, go on.
I have a couple of questions for you. I remember, I think what you did here is pretty amazing, and the fact that they were skeptical about collaborative planning before through this process is very amazing. I mean,
yeah, it is odd.
And yeah, and I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the first time I heard this story, you mentioned there was people talking about this issue all over the place, and it took, I don't remember how much time it passed, and you were like in these meetings and hearing about this topic, and nobody will take care of it and will say, hey, this is a decision. Can you maybe expand a little bit of it on it? Because I think that that realization, it's very important, and sometimes, we were in projects in which we walk in circles and we do not realize we have to do this.
Yeah, that it had been going on for, I suspect, several months. I had set up a collaborative planning routine with the group who were looking at the precast option. And they abandoned that collaborative planning routine about 6 weeks later than I ran this workshop. But in that 2 months that I was running the collaborative planning before this workshop, I just heard of 2 or 3 discussions, and one of these discussions was bouncing around between the people who were due next to come into a collaborative planning session with me. So I couldn't help but hear it. And being nosy and a lean freak, I thought, I can't keep my paws off this. I'm going to offer them something here, and trust that Paz's training is good enough to sort it out. And I think it probably, the training did enable me to do it. You have to just try these things. So a little thanks to Paz on the way through there.
I think you had that in yourself already.
So, quick question from me, Chris.
Yeah.
How come there was so? What do you think was the reason why they were so hesitant to use collaborative planning? Was there a historical reason, perhaps, or could you put your finger on it?
I'm going to try. I almost get the impression that some of their people actually like the idea of being old-fashioned and doing it the way we've always done it.
Okay.
It's quite the collaborative planning sessions that I did, they worked in terms of the communication. They didn't have much influence on the behaviour.
Yeah,
Do you get the distinction?
Yeah. Thank you.
I can see.
Chris, I have another question, because you said it took like 2 minutes to discuss the topic of the cost.
Yeah.
And it was like you had like 20 minutes talking about the value, right?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, did the group realize that cost wasn't even a big issue there? Because usually when you train people, they always think about costs and we need to put the cost first. it's very hard at the beginning to get the cost out there of their way. So I was wondering, after the session, did people realize that cost wasn't the point here? How did they feel about it?
I think a good portion of them were aware that whether it was the cheaper option, it might well be the quicker option to use precast. And so that made it slightly easier. But it just wasn't it didn't cause an issue. It just, we talked, the beauty of taking the cost thing out, we talked about it as a bunch of engineers talking about a safety related choice. And I think the wider point for me, and I've used it, you refer to this elsewhere, it's not the cost or the time that can be the thing, the distraction, but it's the emotion. So actually, we just took the emotion out of it.
Right.
Looked at it as an engineering problem.
Right.
So it's sort of more of a technical question actually about the Thames crossing itself. Did you use was this purely just for that central section then, the precast, or did you use that all the way through?
That group is working within central section, but the proposal will apply to the whole of the project. Okay.
No, it's quite fascinating. My background is actually wastewater modelling, so it's kind of it's sort of flowed into that.
Can I ask a question, Chris?
Yeah.
Can you use a bit more time on elaborating on how you sold the idea of actually making a workshop for this decision? So, how did you get through to actually the influencers on the project and sold the idea that perhaps this is a choosing by advantage decisions, because the project was not, as far as I know, aware of the method.
No.
Or you actually presented it as a solution to this particular problem?
I think there will have been some at the meeting who went along with it because they were asked. And I think there were a few who went along with it because they had tried everything else for months and nothing had worked. They were aware that they were going round and round in circles with this. And they were getting pretty hot under the collar about the fact that they were going around in circles with it. So it was actually quite an easy audience to convince. Yeah, they tried all the other points on the junction. Let's try this one.
Yeah, exactly. I see that sometimes is the time where people are interested in actually using some of the lean tools, like collaborative planning or like choosing by advantage, is when they get into a problem they need to solve. And luckily sometimes we can help them with it, but on other times it's a bit too late. How do you think about that?
I would guess that 2/3 of the work I've done in lean has been effectively mending something that's in a whole heap of trouble already. Reactive.
Yeah, exactly. Another question could be that you started saying that the workshop came up with a recommendation, not a decision. Can you explain what you think the difference is?
Yeah. We felt as a group we hoped that we could get to the point where we could make a recommendation. The recommendation was based on the comparison of the safety cases, and it then went to the Tideway project board, and and their decision was, there was only two parts of that decision. One was, no, we can't carry on with investigating the precast option, or two, yes, we have a way, we should carry on investigating the precast option. And just to update you, a year on, they are now at the sort of commissioning of the precast segment tunnel building machine. So that's how long a lead-in there was to this. And it'll be another several months before they're actually looking to deploy the thing. But they had to, what they set up was hold points to say, are we happy to carry on? Hold point achieved. Are we happy to carry on? Hold point achieved. Have we got a safety case? Hold point achieved. Move on to the next difficulty, which is what we've done.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that the question about all the recommendation decisions could perhaps broaden out the discussion on who should be in the room for making decisions? So there can sometimes, I assume, be a advantage of not having the real decision makers in the room, so people can speak up freely. And other times it could be nice to have them in the room so you can actually make the decision on the spot. What do you think about that, Chris? Perhaps someone else has an opinion on it.
Well, I think both are good ways. Depends on the decision, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes and it depends also how the team is connected to each other, like how well they know each other, like the relatedness. Because I think if you have a good collaborative team, then it's easy for them to get everyone in the room. If not, if they are not open-minded, or if they're not in the process, like in a collaborative, working in a collaborative way, it's very hard for them, and they will not speak up. It could be. I think it depends also how the group is developed. Yeah.
That particular group had never met before and will never meet again. So I did have to take a fair degree of care to present that, what does good look like, what does success look like, etc., and to explain what we were going to do in some level of detail. And the balance between seniority and authority and whatever, I'd suspect that's different for every single facilitated session you do. Who's the right people in the room? That's the biggest question the facilitator quite often has to answer.
How much time did you use on introducing these people to choosing by advantage as a tool in the workshop? Because that's something I'm often challenged with here, is that we have now a fairly large group that are trained up to high level. We have a large group of 60, 70 people who know what choosing by advantage is because they've been in it before. But we still have hundreds of people who have never been in a CPA before. So they are on all kind of different knowledge levels. But how did you introduce them to it, and how much time did you use in the beginning of the workshop, or in advance of the workshop?
Recall it was probably 10 to 15 minutes.
And they feel comfortable.
And most of that was explaining that, the precautions that have to be in place before you can set up that discussion. Yeah, I've probably got the slide set somewhere, but it was, I would say 10 or 15 minutes.
Right. So Alejandro wrote in the chat section, highest level of competency, lowest in hierarchy. Most of the times work. Alejandro, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was listening to the comments of the conversation. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, not that I talk to myself. So I was just listening to the questions, and it was just a comment that really called my mindset, because it was, hey, is it easier if the decision makers are out of the room so that we're faster? So then they are not the decision makers. If the decision makers are out, everything goes smoothly. That means only they have the highest level of the hierarchy and they think they are the decision makers. If they are out, then maybe we have finally the highest level of competency, and then things go smoother because everybody knows the topic, the operative things of every topic, and not only, hey, I'm the manager, I decide, but I don't have a clue of any operative detail.
As I recall, the emphasis from myself and from the lead was that we wanted the best panel of experts we could assemble. Because the guys on the board, actually, they don't know as much as that group did.
That's a great point.
Right.
So you have to be, I think you have to sometimes be brave and say, that's the group who really knows their way around the business, and that's our recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, Chris, how the people at the end on the higher hierarchy level, when they got the decision and they saw the decision, did they understand why the people decided how they decided? Was it clear to them, or did they try to interrupt?
I wasn't at the meeting, but I didn't get any questions other than the feedback that the recommendation had been accepted by the project board.
Okay.
How
As
would
far as I'm
you,
concerned, it was perfect.
I have a question. What would you say to those people who think, who are doubting about CBA as a method to really make a decision? For those who are skeptical, to say, okay, I will give it a chance and use it as a method to really make decisions within the organization.
I would, and I've tended to do this with collaborative planning and other lean tools, is I tend not to think of it as something specialized and clever. But if you say to a group of people, we're going to set up something that allows that 303 years of experience to make best use of that. If we use a discipline so that we can see clearly the comparisons between one thing and another, and if we put up a big display on the wall so that we can all feel that we're part of that discussion, that sounds pretty well like common sense to me. And most of the time, most of the people think, yeah, that's common sense, I'll go along with that.
Okay, maybe we could ask the question differently, because Alejandro is from automotive. So the question here would be more in kind of the way, if you're not having a project like using collaborative planning or Las Pana to also track the decision and be already involved. How about if you have to implement CBA in your own organization, like in other departments, which are not project-based, they are organization-based? How would you answer the question based on that background?
I would probably go straight back to those principles I just talked about. A lot of the time when I do introductions to lean itself, when you strip it down, a lot of it is applied common sense. And some bright spark will come up and say, well, that's just applied common sense. We all do that. To which my reply is, in which case, we're all lean practitioners. Isn't that good? Is that... Try not to make it sound like rocket science. I'm trying to make it sound like the sort of thing that's unarguable, that's obvious, that's common sense. Yeah, why wouldn't you do that? And that's usually worked for me.
I'll just give it a last try. If I go back to my management team and say, hey, I just had an awesome webinar talking about collaborative decisions and planning, and they talked about the CBA. I think we should just bring it to the organization. And if they ask me, hey, why? And I say, hey, this is just common sense, I might not get lots of support. They are really more into, hey, give me just hard facts of why should I give you my time and my money to get CBA into our organization if I don't know it. Maybe it's a bit hard because I'm the only automotive in the call, but it would be nice to know, hey, can I switch to your world and help me or not really?
Okay, I think in this one, yeah, I get the different question. And the pitch that you may well be looking at is, I think, Mr. Manager, you may have seen instances where decisions have either been put off, taken hastily, or been taken 3 times. Mr. Manager, I think by putting in a choosing by advantages discipline, I can avoid those risks for you. I can reduce your costs because those things cost. And I can produce an audit trail that supports those decisions to help you when you report those decisions to your manager. Is that a better sales pitch?
Sounds like I would buy it, yeah.
Good lad. For a payment of a small fee.
Yeah, sometimes it's just hard to
it is.
to tell a management team which is successful at the moment to say, hey, let's try something new to even be better than what we're today.
Yeah.
So that's why I was just so picky in asking you that in a detailed way. Thank you.
I hope my second answer was better than the first one.
I think this comment is really good, Alessandro, because you're absolutely right. When we talk with managers, they would like hard evidence. They would like to know how much money they are saving, time they're saving, and risk they're avoiding. But when we're talking about our colleagues and our peers, I think what Chris started saying was actually the way to kind of sell that pitch to our colleagues. So I think this is all about who are you targeting? Who would you like to talk to about CPA? And you will need to adopt the arguments according to that.
It's two different audiences. And the golden way of doing it is actually to run a good workshop, because they'll get the point straight away then.
Are there any more questions out there?
Just one more question. I think, I mean, this is all great, your selling points, Chris. And just, I mean, going back to the colleagues' questions, once they experience it, I mean, I can see the power on showing, hey, this is a way in which we actually can make a decision that seems fair. Do you think they see the process as a fair process, and why do you think it's that? I mean, it's a biased question. I already say it's fair, but I already think it's fair. But if you don't, I mean, you're free to say it's not. But the question is more on fairness and how. I mean, how would we explain this?
Crumbs. No, I'm I didn't quite. I'm lost a bit of the question on that.
Yeah, I can elaborate.
Yeah.
On it. So many times, I mean, when we are not implementing CBA, or what happens is that, okay, we walk in circles, and sometimes, I mean, the manager said, okay, this is the decision, and why? Well, because somebody has to make a decision, or nobody wants to make a decision because they don't want to take the risk of being in the future responsible for that decision. Or, I mean, when people talk and there's no structure, there's somebody that's just good at talking, and it's very, I mean, good at convincing others, and there's no like a process, a fair process to get everybody's opinions and gather facts. So, I mean, you have your, I mean, the wheel. So that's, to me, is a way of showing respect and creating an environment with some fairness.
Yeah.
So everybody, I mean, you're saying, hey, everybody has the chance to speak up here.
Yeah.
And we're going to go through all these topics. And there's no one more important than other, which is usually an issue within organizations.
So that's why I talk about the business of, you know, there is a discipline to it that is absolutely essential. And the visual display enabled that room full of people to engage with that process. So it'd be relatively difficult for anybody to say, well, I didn't have a voice. And actually, the thing that you're talking about, I think, is something that we come across with virtually all lean projects, is that if you're making an improvement, there's an implied message that there was a problem in the first place. And I did once come across, just the once, come across a group who were that well organized that even just doing things around the office, we could hardly find anything they could improve on. They were brilliant, but I've only found it once. Every other group, you think, oh, there's something we can do better here. Every other collaborative planning group, there's, yeah, we can do better if we do this. And all these decisions, you know, yeah, this has helped, because otherwise we'd have wandered about in nowhere land for some time to get to the same point.
Brilliant.
Only half an answer, I'm afraid, I think, but...
I think we can continue this discussion, because I think that's quite an important topic, and actually the fairness of CBN decision making, I think, could be another topic for another webinar perhaps in the future. If we don't have more questions now, I'm sure that Annette will like to end.
Yay.
Yay.
After I dropped out in between.
You can't.
All right. So what's going on next? As some of you might notice, we will be participating at the IGLC. We will do a workshop. Pass it me, and I know Wendy, you will participating in the industry day. IGLC is going to be in Dublin this year, and we already submitted some papers about CBA. So hopefully we get good reviews and it's going to be published. Then the next point is the blog post. We're looking forward to receive blog posts. We would like to publish your experience about using CBA. Whatever comes in your mind, please feel free to write a small blog post and submit it to us. And then webinars, we want to continue our webinars. So let us know also what topic would be interesting for you, because we want to help you to improve. So if you have any questions or any interesting topic, just let us know, and we will try to make a webinar based on that. And then also, as you know, before we publishing the webinars on our webpage, and we try to publish more training material on the webpage too. So what we were thinking about is like writing an A3 about CBA, so a small essential, so everyone can have a quick look on it, also publishing it in different languages, because as we have some native speakers here in different languages, this could be quite helpful for our own countries. All right, so that's what's going on next.
Oh, sorry.
And then, yes, that is important. So how to get in touch with us? I guess every one of you has our email, but you can also submit stuff to our homepage. So feel free to submit whatever you want. We're always interested in good stuff. And also, if you're interested in research and you have a project and we can collect data or something, feel free to let us know. We're always looking for data. All right. I think that's it.
I think that's it too. Thank you, Chris, very much for making this presentation today. That was really nice of you, and it was really interesting to hear how you helped, with a specific problem on a project with CPA. So thank you for that, and I hope to hear more good stories from you using CPA as well, as long as from the rest of you too, as well. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chris.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.